Good evening, I am Amadin Ogbewe. Now, there have been various reports that the Ministry of Interior and the Nigeria Immigration Service are mulling plans to increase revenue by making expatriates pay more. This would mean that the foreigners would pay more than their current taxes and other fees in a bid to increase revenue in ingenious ways, as the government has been trying to do recently. Tonight, I'm joined by Professor Abiodun Adeniyi. He joins me now to do justice to the matter and to break down what this new policy, this proposed policy, could mean for the country's revenue and for Nigerians at large. All right, Professor Adeniyi, welcome to Talk Talk.
Thank you.
It's good to have you.
My pleasure.
All right, so if we can just get your general thoughts on this plan that we keep hearing about on the grapevine about wanting to charge expatriates more as a form of new revenue source. I'd like to get your thoughts on it before we delve into any specifics there could be.
Well, every responsible government should be concerned about revenue generation. And when we're talking about revenue generation, we're also concerned about expanding the base, the income base, especially when it is monocultural, like in our own situation. And that's why even before now, we've been talking about steel development, solid mineral development, agriculture, making money from those other sources apart from oil. So these ones can be necessarily long-term. And while you're thinking about the long-term, it's also important to think about revenue from the short-term. Included in the short-term will be maybe portfolio investors, maybe property, maybe looking for new ways, to drag a lot more people into the tax nets. People who have been evading about avoiding tax, how do you drag in some more people? And of course, thinking about expatriates too looks legitimate, especially when it is obtainable in other parts of the world, apart from the levy that they need to pay, to be entitled to work in this country, and apart from the personal income tax that they pay alongside citizens of the country. If there are other avenues or there are other room for government to take advantage of the many number of expatriates in this country, evening up to about 200,000, and of course, where, according to projections, we could generate about $1.5 to $2 billion annually. Why not?
That's interesting. Before we delve more into this, you mentioned something I just want to quickly touch on about bringing more people into the tax bracket, or is it widening it? Is there a danger of some persons who are already bearing the brunt being the ones to have added burden? I'm talking about the average person out there, the market woman who's already getting levies from multiple sources, and then when we hear about increase in revenue, we usually see these as excuses for, it seems almost like extortion, some might call it. Is there a risk there, or is there a way government should now be looking to find those who have been evading?
Yeah, very recently government set up a committee, I think headed by one Oyedele, an expert from a consultancy firm, to harmonize the many taxes that we have, to streamline it, make them much more efficient and productive. That looks a good way to go. But again, I don't think that tax can be too much, especially when it is considerate, when the accruals from tax are properly deployed, because governments hardly can survive, without taxes. But I understand what you mean, that those at the lower rung shouldn't be overtaxed. That's a standard all over the world. Those who are huge income earners, who earn more, are made to pay more, and of course, when you collect more from them, you deploy it into services for the general good of all. That's the practice. So if government is thinking about it, as you probably can imagine, it shouldn't be a focus on those who are already suffering by default, or those who are struggling to pay one levy or the other. I mean, those at the lower rung of the ladder. It shouldn't necessarily be. I believe it's going to be the big businessmen, the big professionals, the multinationals, and particularly those who have been profiteering on account of government concession, one concession or the other. I don't forget, there are so many concessions, so many waivers the government gives to some sets of businessmen. Sometimes these are arbitrarily done, and they run against the interest of the generality of the populace. But government is much more concerned. Government in the past is much more concerned about favoritism rather than merit, about ethnicism, rather than merit, about primordial sentiments, primordial association with some of these business people at the expense of generating more income for the people. If the new discussion or the new narrative is to look for credible sources, credible ways to prevent tax evasion, tax avoidance, arbitrary concession or waivers to those who should be paying, I think it's a welcome development, as the case could be.
Well, that's fair enough. So let's speak now back to the expatriates. Is there an issue here where, or before we go into what could possibly be issues, you spoke about how it's obtainable elsewhere in the world. And we see that sometimes things that seem to work perfectly outside don't always scale well here. The other day, the CBN governor, while giving a speech, cited an example that Nigeria should strive to be like certain countries. I think Brazil was one of those countries. But interestingly, in terms of unemployment rate, but interestingly, by the last MBS statistics, Nigeria is at 4.1% using the new methodology. But then the CBN governor still said that we need to look towards Brazil, who have higher than us on paper, which just goes to show adopting world standards to do things here, doesn't always give the required results. So the question now is, bringing it into Nigeria, what would that look like? Would it work?
Yeah, there are many ways to look at your very important question. One thing is to have the law. The other one is to be bothered about regulation. One thing is to have the policy. The other one is to be concerned about the execution. Is the policy right? Is it appropriate? Yes, will be my response. Will it be possible for us to implement it or execute it? That's another challenge. And of course, the challenge has been the bane of Nigeria's development, of our progress, really. And we have made this point several times that we often have very fantastic stipulations, prescriptions, towards growth and development, or towards the amelioration of the problems of the people. But the thing is that we'll often lack the political will and the system and the organization and the determination, the patriotism, the nationalism to get these things done, So what we need to do in the circumstance is to have the right leadership driving these processes. And when I mean the right leadership, I'm not just concerned about the center, maybe the president or something, no. Not necessarily. We have different levels of leadership. And if the processes is properly driven, I do not see any reason why it should not work here. Your acknowledgement of the fact that things don't work here, I don't think there are hard and fast rules about it. It's just about the absence of leadership to galvanize people or organizations or those who will implement it in the right direction. In those places where they are working, it's not God Almighty that came down to make it work. It is just people being committed and realizing that they are driven from ab initio by somebody who is very strong, who is focused, who is value-laden, who subscribes to virtues, And it's just a matter of us re-strategizing, restating our commitment to making things work here, as the case could be. And it shouldn't be a reason why we should not be compliant with global best practices, especially against the background of the time when we need more revenue.
That's fair enough. You spoke about laws, so to speak. Well, the reports we've been getting so far, the persons involved or bodies involved, I keep hearing is the Ministry of Interior, Immigration, Do you think this is something that can work without legislation? I'm talking about all the way from the National Assembly. Is this something that could just be a policy?
There are different ways in which this can be implemented. And I also believe that there are overarching body of laws that cover some minor things. So you might find that this development, if it is implemented, might have been nested in some overarching legislation. Agencies, institutions have statutory mandates, and those mandates are already ensconced in the Constitution. So the implementation processes of every detail involved in those mandates may not necessarily have to be going to the National Assembly for vetting. That's my take in the immediate circumstance, because we are expected, the Ministry of Finance, for instance, or FIRS, is mandated to generate revenue, to collect tax for government. They do not have to go back to the National Assembly to confirm or not whether they have to collect tax. How they go about collecting it, who they involve in the tax net, will be solely a matter of initiative, that rests with them. So that's my take on it. And again, if it has to go, I do not also see why the National Assembly, because they are part of us. They know what is going on. They know that we do not have money. They know we need money. I do not see how they will be opposed to us generating money through the involvement of a section of people who are progressing in this country, who in some ways are also directly or indirectly preventing qualified professionals, from not being unemployed or underemployed, as the case could be.
All right. But speaking about what could be the ripple effects of this, I think there's a saying in France, shave the tourists so close, but not enough that the skin is irritated. Which is basically talking about tourists like sheep, that you take the wool
Yes,
from.
I know.
Yes. So the issue now is there a point where it could be too much and discourage?
No, I don't think so. Nigeria is a very fertile country. There's a lot of promise, a lot of prospect. We have a burgeoning population. The market is there, the labor is there, and of course the industries are there. The investors are also there, and many of these investors sometimes even have much more confidence in these foreign experts, in these foreign professionals. They have confidence in them. So we see their influx, irrespective of the evolution of Japa syndrome. A lot of people are still trooping in. Lots of Asians, Chinese, Indians, Europeans, Americans are trooping into different sectors. Construction, oil and gas, manufacturing, agriculture, we have them aplenty. So if they're not prospering, if they're not making profit and repatriating income, income that is probably also putting additional pressure on Forex, compounding the problem we're having. If there's no prosperity, I'm not sure they'll be coming into the country, or they will rather want to remain. And I also want to believe that government is not inconsiderate as to formulate that policy with a bit to discouraging the influx of expatriates. It shouldn't be conceived like that. How I imagine it's being conceived is to say that, okay, we shouldn't be sleeping on our rights. There's still an opportunity for us to get some more funds from them, as it's obtainable in some other countries, beyond the basic levy that they pay. Do you know, if you bring to some other countries, it takes a lot for foreigners, particularly Nigerian migrants, to get integrated into those societies. Beyond the fact that they pay for visa, they pay for a lot more things, And of course, some of these things are the things that we are sleeping over. And the target, it's not going to be a sweeping policy from what I've been reading in newspapers, targeting only foreign nationals or expatriates, all foreign expatriates. No. People working for international organizations, multilateral organizations, the World Bank, NGOs, international CSOs, diplomats, ambassadors, consular officials. These ones are obviously going to be excluded. So you can see some level of consideration as well. But those who are coming for business, to work as investors, as professionals, skilled men, engineers, especially construction workers. I think it's okay if beyond the $2,000 that they're presently expected, $2,000 that they're presently expected to pay, if there's an extra income, applied to them. And do not forget, many of these expatriates are itinerant. They move from one place to the other, from one state to the other. And because you are supposed to pay your personal income tax, which is the only thing they pay now, apart from the $2,000 they pay on entry, the only other thing they pay is personal income tax. And when they are paying it, they pay it in their states of residence. As somebody who is itinerant, who he pays it today, and by tomorrow he has moved into the next state. It becomes very difficult for you to keep track of whether or not they are evading or avoiding tax. Because they are constantly, because of their high level of locomotion, they are constantly on the move. But if there's a central pool, maybe a federal pool, a standard payment that they're supposed to make, irrespective of whichever state they go to, it becomes much more productive for the system, and you're able to keep a better tab on the activities and the income that you make from them, at the level of inflow.
Yeah, that's fair enough when you put it that way. But let's talk about the expatriates who are now paying more. I'd like to know what other ripple effects do you think could come? You already mentioned Forex, which is something that this affects a lot. But there used to be this mindset that a lot of companies here anyway that opt to bring in expatriates. They usually do so because of expertise, which is expected ideally that these persons come and for a period of time train those here and then return.
But they don't go.
Yeah. Do you think this is one of the ripple effects we might be seeing?
They don't go, and when you have this kind of standard process of putting additional obligation, it has a way. It could have a way of discouraging them. So if the ripple effect you are talking about is in the positive, I agree. To discourage them, from thinking of staying longer than necessary when they are probably grown people who can do the job that they are doing, or where we have also developed a lot more people who can do the job that they are doing. But when you find a zone that is less taxing in terms of, that is less tasking in terms of tax commitment, of course you find it very comfortable. And of course, when you raise your money in foreign currency and you export it, it serves no economic purpose for the country where you are making the money from. And so the more you are able to reduce the number of people in this practice through some additional obligation, additional financial obligation, the better for the system. And as well, the better, it's also, those who are going to be better for it will as well be those who are probably unemployed or those who are underemployed, because you now begin to have a gradual process of discouraging people who stay longer than necessary, or people who are staying because commitments are limited or because obligations are limited, and they want to take advantage of a weak system, of a system where people, or where the state or the government is sleeping over its rights.
So do you envision a situation where companies can now opt for the local alternatives, rather than always trying to get foreign expatriates, sometimes for optics' sakes?
Well, it depends, but I agree with you to the extent that we are still very neo-colonial in our thinking. Sometimes when you see workers, professionals of the Caucasian origin, you place on them some level of superiority, thinking that they are better. No, it's not necessary all the time. And I'll give the example of the banking sector that is largely indigenous. How many expatriates, foreigners do you see working in Nigerian banks? And many of them, are doing excellently well, So as much as we are seeing efficiency and productivity in the banking sector, with the routining of our mindset, you can also see efficiency in the mining sector, in the construction and manufacturing sector, even in the oil and gas sector, where you have a larger proportion of these expatriates. So it's about reconstruction of our mindset, redesigning the policy, and of course, letting it work for the good of your country. we're not saying that, you know, expatriates should be discouraged from coming or from working or from contributing their quota, especially in a world that is globalized, you know, where there's centralization everywhere, in a world that is decentered, integrated, you know, in a flux. That's not what we're saying. But what we're just saying is that we should have a better expatriate management system at the level of obligation, you know, to the nation's finances, especially where we see well over 20 countries, you know, taking more money from them than we are presently doing. If other countries are doing it, why not us? If Japan is doing it, why not us? If Singapore is doing it, why not Nigeria? Are foreigners not still going to Singapore? Are they not still going to Japan? They're still going there. Yeah. You know, so what's the scare? What's the fear? What's the fear? And of course, we also have our Nigerian migrants. Nigerians are immigrating every day, populating and contributing to the economic development of many of these countries. Okay? They are working their ass out and paying all the requisite taxes. I'm sure you will have been hearing stories of how most of the money they make go into taxes. Sometimes we are even discouraged from working too much and earning too much because of the tax you earn. I've been in England before. I worked as a student, as a PhD student. At the time, I was combining 3 jobs. And I was earning, my overall take-home before tax was getting to about £2,700, even as a student, right? But what comes to me after tax was about £1,800. So I was earning about 207. I was getting like £1,800. So what was the point doing all this work? So I now reduced the number of hours, the number of jobs I was doing, and I had to manage, you know, the 1,200 that ended up in my account because it looks more reasonable to me. Not because I don't want the government to progress, but it was a way to just also limit you from overworking yourself and preventing others from getting opportunity to work. You can see how policies can balance things. You know? So it was for the good of the system, of the system of the country where I was, of the UK where I was. This is a balancing out. These things are not necessarily meant to be negative. It's just a balancing act, and every responsible government, you know, should not lose sight of it.
That's fair enough. There's an ongoing argument, almost an unending argument, that I'd like to get your thoughts on. This whole thing is coming up because of the government trying to find smart ways or ingenious ways to get revenue. So the argument is that Nigeria as a country, some say we have a revenue problem. Others disagree. They say we have a spending problem, that we have all the money we need, we're just not spending it well. And then there's some people in the middle who feel we have both. I'd like to get your thoughts on this, especially because we're going to be seeing more of this, even in Abuja here. I don't know if he has categorically said it's for revenue purpose, but we know the Minister for FCT with the recertification and for C of O's and all of that, people say, well, maybe he's also trying to find ingenious ways to get more revenue. So that question, does Nigeria have a revenue problem or a spending problem or something else?
My brother, we have all the problems combined, both revenue and spending. We don't have enough money, and the one we have, we fritter it away. You know, there are so many leakages, there are so many wastes, and we see them every day. Right? I don't want to go into specifics, but you and I know. So we have, our problem is one of discipline, really. You know, because the money comes, even there are fears. This expatriate business that we're talking about, people are already expressing fears that if we make that kind of money, what's the guarantee that it will be well spent? You know, because the one we spent them, right? We borrow money all throughout through the Buhari administration. We resorted onto only the economics of borrowing. We're borrowing heavy money, huge amounts of money. But what would you say the monies? How would you say the monies were applied? There's no problem with debt. Countries, the most prosperous countries in the world, are probably the most indebted. The United States is the most indebted country in the world. But look at prosperity. Japan is second. But look at prosperity. But here we are. Our debt burden is increasing. But where is it? What are we using the money for? The bulk of it go for recurrent expenditure The rest is lavish on frivolities, leakages, embezzled, okay? Misappropriated, misapplied. And when this money is misappropriated or misapplied or embezzled, where are they taken to? Where are they kept? They are not kept in the bank so that it can help economic activity, but they are kept in private vaults, in homes, in vaults, in homes. Or if they are not kept in those places, they are taken abroad to buy houses, to help the development of those economies further, right? And of course, the system suffers because those stolen monies, bad as it is, also turn around not serving any economic purpose. So you can see a circle of misery. And of course, the only thing to do about it is just to bring about a reorientation, some level of commitment. It's not so much about generating money, but about how you also want to spend the money. So we have both a revenue problem and we also have an expenditure style program.
So for the revenue aspect now, what we're saying is the government trying to find new ways. For that spending part, what can be done? That it's a government issue, but it affects everyone. So what kind of pressure do you think can be put on the government? Because in the last couple of days, we've been seeing different exposures. Well, let me not use the word exposure. Bringing to the fore of government expenditures in different states, how the State House spends more than what they generate and so on and so forth. So we've been seeing that kind of pressure. But let me give an instance with Lagos. When that list was brought forth by the ADC governorship candidate, there was a particular line which was an SUV, I believe, for 440 million naira for the office of the chief of staff. And the response, this is the response from the government itself, was that it is in tune with the current economic realities. So that's how the government saw that expenditure. So the question now is there anything that can be done from the CSO, opposition, citizen end that really impresses on the government that they need to do better?
That's a fundamental question. Because this thing is sometimes not even limited to government alone. There are ways in which citizens are also accomplices.
Really?
Right. That's why there's a book written by Professor Adebo on corruption in Nigeria. I mean, the book concluded by saying that the problem of corruption is not just limited to individuals. You apprehend one individual today, and of course, you prosecute him, you think that you are solving problem, corruption. No, corruption is insidious. It's endemic and systemic. Every Nigerian, the average Nigerian, Bishop Kuka once argued, is looking for opportunity to also be corrupt by getting into government. So it's so systemic. That's why sometimes I find it difficult to isolate government officials. Because sometimes there's also huge expectation on them from the community, from their friends, from everywhere. It's a deep-seated problem that can only be broken, by a crazy leader, crazy in parentheses, somebody who's unusual, who will want to, make a name, leave a legacy, but by offending a whole lot of people, that's the only way. The other way probably is to have very strong system, very strong institution, strong mechanism that will checkmate, misapplication of resources. We tried this in the Obasanjo regime with different kinds of reform system. We had the public procurement system, Bureau of Public Procurement. We had the BPSR. We had the ICPC. We had the EFCC. Many reform agencies. But you can see gradually, many of them are not adding much value anymore to dealing with the problem because they've been overwhelmed by the systemic, deep-rooted perversion of our values, leading to self-aggrandizement of collective patrimony.
Indeed, it's something to really think about and work on. And we do hope to see some of these things begin to appear, in government and also, like you said, amongst us, the citizens who also make up the country. Thank you so much, Prof, for coming on.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Yes,